On Saturday, December the 13th, an ambush attack in the ancient Syrian city of Palmyra left 3 Americans dead and 3 others wounded. The perpetrator was a lone gunman acting on behalf of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, better known as ISIS. According to Syrian sources, that lone gunman had infiltrated the local security forces and was just 1 day away from being found out as an extremist, and that's when he saw his moment to act. The dead were a pair of American soldiers and a US civilian, working as an interpreter, part of a US force of roughly 900 troops that's tasked with rooting out ISIS in the open desert. They were the first US combat deaths since the start of Donald Trump's second term in January this year. For an American audience, the ambush has raised a series of difficult questions for Washington to answer. How was this allowed to happen? What were US troops even doing in Syria? And if ISIS was capable of something like this, are US troops even succeeding in their mission? But for close observers of the Middle East, as horrific as this attack was, it wasn't exactly a surprise. Over the course of the last year, the Islamic State has been reconstituting itself across Syria, adding new recruits, expanding into new areas, and slowly infiltrating the Syrian state itself. They're planning prison breaks, massacres, attacks on oil fields and critical infrastructure, as well as American and Syrian troops alike. And when that lone gunman killed 3 Americans on Saturday the 13th, that wasn't even the only ISIS attack in Syria that very day. The deaths of these 3 Americans, like the death of any person in a conflict zone, it's a tragedy. But for Damascus, for Washington, and for the entire world, their deaths need to be a wake-up call about something far larger. A decade has passed since the height of the Islamic State insurgency, and now the Islamic State is on the brink of a comeback. A gunman in Palmyra. Even by our standards here at WarFronts, the risk posed by the Islamic State in Syria is particularly dire. But although we're going to outline a much larger issue plaguing the country, the attack on the 13th of December is a grimly appropriate starting point. On that day, US forces and their partners in the Syrian security services were on a Syrian base in the ancient city of Palmyra, known prior to the Syrian civil war as a major historical site. The city had spent nearly 2 years under Islamic State control from 2015 to 2017, during which time ISIS fighters set about destroying major historical sites and well-preserved monuments and structures. The destruction, according to the Islamic State, was an attempt to destroy Syria's cultural heritage while pillaging valuables and selling them off to support the Islamic State war effort. All that is to say, Palmyra has been very important to the Islamic State since the peak of its power, and although the city was later recaptured by the Assad regime, partially restored, and then passed into the hands of Syria's new transitional government, it's still located in an area where ISIS cells are known to be active. On that same base, with the Americans and their partners in the Syrian security forces, was a man who had only recently signed up to fight for Syria's interior ministry. When he joined around 2 months ago, he initially worked as a base security guard, although he had been reassigned to a local security unit just days prior to the shooting. His reassignment had happened because his higher-ups were onto him. He had been targeted as a suspected affiliate of the Islamic State, according to Syrian officials, because an unidentified infiltrator had recently started leaking information to ISIS contacts. Instead of detaining him immediately, the Syrian forces had decided to observe him in order to find out who he was talking to, who he was meeting with, and where he was sniffing around, while reassigning him to what was thought to be a safer position of guard duty. There, he was supposed to be sufficiently far away from US forces, and according to Syria's Interior Ministry spokesman, the man had been a single day away from being removed. In short, the attacker was a known quantity, suspected of being an asset of the Islamic State, and believed to be an active security threat to the US personnel at the base. All that surveillance, however, ultimately came to nothing. During a lunchtime meeting between US officers and their Syrian partners, the ISIS infiltrator arrived at their location and opened fire, killing the 3 Americans before there was even a moment to respond. Before he was neutralized, the attacker also managed to wound 3 other Americans and 3 members of the Syrian security forces who had tried to confront him. Within a few moments, armed responders at the scene were able to react and the gunman was shot and killed. He has not yet been identified at the time of writing. The 2 deceased US soldiers were both members of the National Guard, hailing from the state of Iowa. The civilian interpreter has not yet been publicly named. It was the first attack to kill US troops in Syria since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024, and America's deadliest day in Syria since January 2019. The hours immediately following the attack were marked by a string of raids and arrests by Syria's military alongside its internal security forces. Those troops swept the wider region of Badia, where the attack had taken place, and zeroed in on a number of alleged Islamic State cells that were already known to the Syrian government, but that were under observation, similar to the gunmen in Palmyra. 5 people were arrested inside the ancient city. Also across the following day, Islamic State operatives carried out multiple small attacks across Syria, the most notable of which took place on Sunday the 14th, when 4 members of Syria's internal security forces were killed and another was wounded in an ambush in the province of Idlib. We'd also be remiss not to mention a terror attack halfway across the globe, also on Sunday, when at Australia's Bondi Beach, a father and son who'd each pledged their loyalty to the Islamic State killed 16 people and injured 43 during a Hanukkah celebration. It was Australia's deadliest mass shooting since the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, and while it's not yet clear whether any higher-level Islamic State operatives were aware of the attack before it happened, investigators have already revealed that a pair of Islamic State flags were found in the car that the gunman had brought to the scene. We should note that another planned attack in the west, disrupted in Germany's Lower Bavaria region, which planned to attack a Christmas market, does not appear to have been linked to the Islamic State movement, according to German authorities. All in all, that weekend was one of the bloodiest 2-day spans around the globe for the Islamic State movement since the late 2010s. But the weekend's events also point to a larger and more troubling reality, and one that diligent Syria analysts and radicalization experts have been warning about for quite a while. The Islamic State is in the process of reconstituting, building itself back up after several years spent lying low, and the nation of Syria is believed to be the heart of their resurgence. Not only was Syria the home of ISIS's attempts to build a caliphate in the mid-2010s, stretching between Syrian and Iraqi territory for multiple years, but it's a nation that's only just emerged from a devastating civil war where a weak central government and nationwide chaos have created the perfect environment for an extremist movement to thrive. Today, Syria is known to be home to a rapidly rebuilding network of ISIS cells, and those cells have started to graduate from extortion, fuel tanker ambushes, and the laying of roadside bombs into a series of more direct confrontations with Syrian forces. Now, although Syria's current leadership after the fall of the Assad regime has presided over its fair share of atrocities, we've got to be very clear, this is not a situation where an Islamist movement took over Damascus and immediately started supporting a more radical Islamist movement in the countryside. Say what you want about the Syrian transitional leader Ahmed al-Sharab and his inner circle, and to be clear, there is a lot that you could say, but they and the Islamic State movement have been exceptionally bitter enemies for the last decade. Syria's state security forces haven't been totally adequate in dealing with ISIS, just see this latest round of attacks, but they do appear to be doing the best they can to bring down the movement, even as they make frequent and fatal miscalculations, and also perpetrate unrelated massacres and atrocities on several of Syria's minority groups. In fact, just this November, Damascus officially joined the global coalition to defeat ISIS, reversing over a decade of Assad-era policy in which Syria refused to work with that coalition, despite also wanting to snuff out the Islamic State. Meanwhile, Kurdish-led forces in Syria's autonomous northeast have tried their best to keep up the pressure on the Islamic State, and US-led multinational forces maintain a presence on the ground, although America's troop deployment has shrunk over the course of the last year. So, the Islamic State isn't overtly receiving help from any of Syria's rival internal governments or partner forces, but it has learned that it can thrive in the chaos of post-war Syria. A large portion of the country, from minority Druze and Alawites to Assad regime loyalists, are deeply distrustful of the new Syrian government. Syria's forces are disorganized, undertrained to serve in a counter-terrorism role, and trying to work alongside extremist paramilitaries that bear responsibility for the worst of the country's recent massacres. Syria, as well as its major backer Turkey, are placing pressure on Kurdish-led forces in the northeast, forcing those Kurdish forces to redirect their soldiers away from anti-Islamic State duties at a time when a shrinking foreign troop presence plus a weak government presence in the sparsely populated southeast have already allowed the Islamic State to run wild. In short, Syria has become the perfect environment for the Islamic State to rebuild, and they've been doing just that non-stop for the last year and more. ISIS Resurgent. Now, even before the Assad regime collapsed, Middle East experts were already sounding the alarm that the Islamic State was coming back. Not only that, but they were emphasizing that the Islamic State was different now, more decentralized, more cunning, and more operationally aware. This was no longer the same group of young, hot-headed ultra-radicals that had tried to establish a caliphate, believing that they could stand up to global air power and withstand a concerted worldwide attempt to eliminate them. This was a group that had learned the lessons of its initial defeat and had undergone a complete rethink of its tactics and strategy in order to survive. Today's ISIS organization, that is, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, is just one node in a far larger Islamic State network around the world. Using the internet, major Islamic State outfits in the Sahel, West Africa, Somalia, Mozambique, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and elsewhere can collaborate with global financiers, recruiters, and operational planners, supporting each other through a system that leverages digital stealth, money laundering, secretive finance networks, and even artificial intelligence to great effect. On the ground, ISIS has learned to decentralize itself across Syria, spreading into cities, towns, and villages all over the nation, staying low to the ground and using encrypted communications to avoid detection. They've learned to operate like organized criminals, as well as jihadists, funding themselves through armed robbery, extortion, kidnapping, drugs, weapons, and human trafficking, and whatever other illicit enterprise will pay the bills. They've been able to let go of their aspirations to establish a caliphate at least any time in the near future, and they've recognized that in practice, all that their attempted caliphate achieved was to gather their fighters in full view of coalition bombers. They've established cross-border transnational networks in Iraq. They've worked out mutually beneficial arrangements with other extremist groups that they once might have fought, and although it's practically impossible to know their recruitment numbers with any certainty, they appear to have swelled their ranks with thousands of new fighters over the last few years. This is a problem that international leaders have known about all along. In July 2024, US Central Command warned openly that ISIS was working to reconstitute itself, and under America's Biden administration, US troop deployments surged into the thousands to try and address the problem. Since the start of the Trump administration, however, those deployments have shrunk again, and Washington has made clear that it might withdraw entirely. While the US has engaged in high-profile precision airstrikes and ground raids in 2025, those actions have mostly targeted senior-level ISIS operatives who are important to the movement, but who are very easily replaced in an operation that's built to be decentralized because ISIS knows that most of its high-ranking operatives will be killed sooner or later. Syria's new security forces, as we've mentioned, have worked to keep ISIS as constrained as they can, and they too have carried out regular raids and mass arrests while breaking up hidden cells. But they've often found themselves on the receiving end of Islamic State ambushes, and their preference to monitor cells in hopes that cells under surveillance will reveal the existence of others has a tendency to backfire. While Kurdish-led forces continue to deal with the Islamic State where and when they can, they've had to shift into a far less proactive posture, while starting to release and repatriate ISIS fighters and supporters held in massive camps in the northeast. All told, even though security forces are still trying to deal with the ISIS threat, it just hasn't been enough. Judging by their recent actions, it appears that ISIS fully understands that this situation presents it with an opportunity, not just to pursue its objectives quicker or more openly, but to broaden its ambitions in this permissive environment. For one thing, it appears that the presence of an ISIS infiltrator within Syria's security forces was far from a one-off occurrence. According to Damascus insiders, hundreds of ISIS loyalists may have wormed their way into the Syrian military or the interior security services, taking advantage of rushed recruitment processes and insufficient vetting. They've also taken the opportunity to move deeper into Syrian cities, with larger, better armed cells now able to hide out inside major population centers. Perhaps most troubling of all, their long-time focus on Syria's ISIS prison camps appears to be shifting from a focus mostly on observation toward future operations in the near term. Roughly 25,000 refugees, mostly women and children, currently live in Syria's Al-Hol camp, where a well-organized faction of women loyal to ISIS are known to carry out internal repression and indoctrination. As one camp administrator put it, speaking to the New York Times just weeks ago, quote, "All of the women here are radical. They all stayed with the Islamic State until the end. But the bigger problem is that the mothers are educating their kids according to the Islamic State ideology." End quote. Not far away, over 8,000 ISIS fighters are confined in massive prisons, technically watched over by Syria's autonomous Kurdish-led faction, but in practice, watching the number of guards and their available resources continually shrink. Put yourself in the position of a high-level ISIS operative, free in the countryside, with dozens or hundreds of armed fighters at your disposal, and the objective is clear: orchestrate a jailbreak as soon as possible. Syrian and international officials attest that multiple jailbreak attempts and prison attack plots have been thwarted this year alone, and while that does show that Syrian and partner forces can stay ahead of those attempts for now, it also shows that the prisons remain a critical priority for ISIS. In January of 2022, a major Islamic State attack in the Al-Sinnar prison led to the escape of hundreds of prisoners, with 346 ISIS fighters and 159 Kurdish paramilitary troops killed over the course of the battle. Today, if ISIS were to try something similar, Kurdish forces wouldn't be able to put up the same sort of fight, essentially because they've got fewer resources and personnel at their disposal. Worse yet, with the US disengaging from Syria and from Kurdish forces specifically, it's not clear that they'd get much help from the outside. ISIS, by contrast, appears to have learned a lesson from that battle. If they're going to try a jailbreak on that scale again, then they'd better make sure it works, and they'd better leverage maximum firepower to make that happen. Of course, even if the Islamic State did free all those prisoners, it's highly unlikely that they would try and restart the caliphate of the 2010s. But that's mostly because ISIS now has a much better understanding of when and how it can cause damage. Even though the Islamic State's eventual goal is to build, well, the Islamic State, it's learned that it can get a lot further by creating chaos than by trying to capture territory too early. And as we're discussing insurgency and counterinsurgency, it's here that the numbers in Syria really start to favor the Islamic State in a way that should be chilling to onlookers all across the globe. Look at the impact of one single jihadist who was able to infiltrate one single camp and carry out one single attack on December the 13th. The leader of the United States is vowing, quote, very serious retaliation. The attackers shared the global news cycle with another Islamic State-inspired attack in Australia, and while the group might have to absorb a bit of short-term pain, its attacks are likely to benefit ISIS in several ways at once. Over the course of the weekend, through a handful of attacks and primarily the work of just 3 men in Syria and Australia, the Islamic State may be able to accelerate America's withdrawal from Syria, erode international trust in Syria's security forces, intensify the disagreements between the Syrian government and the Kurdish-led northeast, spread panic and terror in Australia, and force world governments to expend significant resources on domestic counterterrorism and surveillance. Now multiply that impact tens of thousands of times to account for all the ISIS fighters spread out across Syria and all the fighters who may soon be broken out of their prison camps. The danger is clear that once the Islamic State shifts from a rebuilding phase to an all-out operational phase, the damage could be truly massive. As strange of an idea as this may sound, we've got to emphasize that when ISIS first popped up in the 2010s, the world got lucky with the tactical missteps they made. They didn't choose to fight to their fullest asymmetric potential. They concentrated their forces openly in a bid to occupy land, and luckily for Syria and the entire world, they were forced to pay the price. But the ISIS of the 2010s is very different. It's smarter, it's more cunning, and it's willing to delay its high ambitions for as long as is necessary to cause maximum damage today. The world has been far too slow in countering this resurgent threat, and although now the world might be in the process of waking up, it's waking up too late. The Islamic State attacks in Palmyra, Idlib, and Australia this weekend were tragedies, but they were not isolated incidents, and acting as if they were will only put more lives at risk. Thank you for watching.